Going to begin our presentation. My name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. I'd like to welcome everybody to the ISO 9001-2015.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
I'd like to welcome everyone to the ISO 9001-2015 Preparing for a Successful Transition webinar. Again, my name is Joseph Krolikowski, and I am the Technical Director of Perry Johnson Registrars. A couple of notes for everybody here. The participants, all of you are in mute. If you do have questions, we have the question dashboard in your webinar presentation here. Definitely feel free at any point to type in your questions, and we will be making time for questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Our topics for today include the following. We're going to discuss a bit about where the standards come from, the origin and the writers. We're going to talk about why the standard is changing at this particular time, what the goals of the change are. We're going to review the timeline, which we are nearing the end of the timeline. We're going to have an in-depth discussion of the key changes. This is going to include a review of the now finalized structure of the standard, and I think you'll find that part of the presentation helpful. We're going to review what I'm sure is a very critical question for many of you. Do we have to overhaul our current system? We have some frequently asked questions that have come up in past presentations that we've now prepared some standard responses for. I have some final points, and then as mentioned earlier, we will definitely make time for your questions. So let's begin with a review of the origin of these standards and where they come from. The ISO stands for International Organization for Standardization, and it is a collective. It's an international collective made up of numerous international members. Each of the standards that ISO publishes are assigned to a technical committee. The technical committee for ISO 9001 is TC 176. And for its part, TC 176 includes members from each of the major industrialized nations. Now here in the United States, our members are taken from the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI. Let's dig in a little bit into why the standard is changing, why things are changing again. Perhaps for some of you, the 2000 and 2008 revisions still feel kind of new. And you're questioning why are things changing. Well, the ISO recognized that the needs of the industries that use ISO 9001, and there are a lot of them, those needs have evolved, and the standard is going to need to continue to evolve to keep up with the changing needs from those industries. They want to see ISO 9001 used in more sectors, more industries, so that the benefits of ISO 9001 can be felt elsewhere. They have paid particular attention to simplifying the language that's been used in the standard, and this is intended to aid both in understanding and in consistency. Consistency between auditors, consistency between registrars, and so forth. And finally, it was recognized that for a lot of companies, there is a need for better cross-compatibility between standards. Perhaps some of you on the call today have more than one certification. You may have ISO 9001 and ISO 14001. There are companies out there with 3, 4, and even more certifications, and it was felt that if there was better cross-compatibility between those standards, those kinds of companies would find the overall certification process to be a little easier to handle. Nigel Croft, the TC 176 chairperson, for his part, indicated that there are 3 key features that the TC 176 group wants the new version of ISO 9001 to have. First, we want to continue to foster the process approach. Processes are and a very important part of how the standard is utilized and how it's interpreted. Processes are all about approaching things in a systematic manner, management being results-based, seeking consistency, and so forth. Nigel also indicated that the cycle of Plan, Do, Check, Act is also very much going to be a part of the new standard, and that exists at both the process and the overall system level. The new idea that's fostered by this new standard is the idea of risk-based thinking. Now, as you're going to see as we dig into this a little bit further, risk-based thinking is new terminology, but the ideas behind it are not so new. It's just now that these are being more prominently called out as auditable criteria, as implementable requirements within the new standard. Let's take a look at the current timeline and where things are at in terms of the transition. These are the dates that have come and gone, going all the way back to June 2013. We saw the issuance of the committee draft. This document was pretty much just for the TC 176 membership. That gave way in May of 2014 for the draft international standard, or DIS. Our very earliest webinars on this topic were based on the DIS. And just last month in July, we saw the publication of the FDIS, or Final Draft International Standard. And our presentation today is based on this document. Now, looking ahead, as I said, we're nearing the end of the timeline here. When we get to September of this year, the plan is we will see the publication of the official international standard, ISO 9001-2015. And 3 years from that date, the intention is that all of the ISO 9001-2008 clients will have successfully transitioned to the new standard. That is a 3-year transition period. So as I mentioned, we are currently at the FDIS stage. The FDIS was published on schedule in July of 2015. It is available for purchase directly from the ISO itself, although we don't recommend that you run out and purchase it unless you have a very aggressive implementation need to be ISO 9001-2015 certified soon. It would be best for you to wait until September when the final standard is available. In terms of what's going on right now, the work is to incorporate all of the comments from the voting members that approved and the handful of those that rejected the FDIS. And the idea is that this will make the final push for the final standard. Our analysis has concluded that the FDIS 9001 itself does not represent a dramatic shift or change from the content that was present in the DIS 9001 document. And by way of extension, it's our expectation that the FDIS is going to very, very closely resemble what will ultimately become the ISO 9001-2015 standard. A couple of key things for you to keep in mind. The transition timeline that I mentioned earlier, that 3-year timeline, does not take hold until the final standard is published. So if, for example, it's published on September 12th of this year, that would mean the cutoff would be September 12th, 2018. If for whatever reason it's pushed out a month or two and we don't see the final standard until October or November, well then the 3-year timeline would still hold. The September 2018 cutoff means that registrars like PJR, we're going to have to establish a cutoff date for our clients to perform their transition audit. Now that's going to depend a lot on the timing of your recertifications, and there's a number of other considerations that need to be made in terms of when the cutoff is going to have to be. Obviously, what we don't want to have happen is to have a majority of clients wait until that last couple of months before the cutoff occurs and then have a mad dash for transition. That could very likely result in some certification lapses. And PJR is obviously going to work diligently to ensure that that does not happen. In May of 2015, the management team at PJR met to discuss whether there was going to be additional audit time needed for a company to transition from ISO 9001-2008 to ISO 9001-2015. And our analysis concluded that for most companies, a small amount of additional audit time was going to be sufficient. Now, each of our current clients is going to be advised on a case-by-case basis what the additional time requirements are going to be and how that's going to be implemented. In terms of the key changes, let's start with a discussion of Annex SL. Now, ISO 9001-2015 is going to be among the first of the ISO standards to make use of Annex SL. You may have heard the terms high-level outline, Annex XL. These are all referring to the same document. Annex SL is, as the name would imply, it's an annex, and it's part of a larger ISO publication. That is ISO IEC Directives Part 1, Consolidated ISO Supplement Procedures Specific to ISO. Now you can think of this as the standard about how to write standards, and it is a publicly available document. I've included a link here. You can read the Directives Part 1 and Annex SL therein. None of what is in there is pertinent necessarily to you at the organizational level, but it is available for review if you so wish. Annex SL, for its part, was first published in 2012, and it represented the output of a joint technical coordination group committee. You can think of Annex SL as a 10-section blueprint for the authoring of the ISO family of standards. Now, it promotes a lot of things, but most important, what it promotes is common terms, core definitions, and a core 10-section framework. The eventual plan calls for all ISO standards to be transitioned by 2016 or 2017. And this is where we were talking about earlier, companies with 2 or more certifications. Annex SL is what's going to make it easier and more fluid for you to have multiple certifications, because the 10 sections that appear in ISO 9001 are the same 10 sections that will appear in ISO 14001 and ISO 27001, and so on and so forth. So let's take a look at that 10-section structure and kind of give you a sense of what's where. Sections 1 through 3 are non-auditable content. They include a scope. What scope does this standard apply to? Normative references. This establishes linkages to other core documents, terms and definitions. And then we hit our first real auditable content in Section 4, context of the organization. There's some new terminology here that we'll be looking at. Interested party. This is where we're defining the scope, defining our system and its processes. In Sections 5 and 6, we have the new term leadership, talking about the role of what was formerly referred to as top management, looking at the defining of responsibility and authority. Section 6, planning, we have the new risk requirements and risk management. This is the new placeholder for quality objectives. Planning of changes is here. In Section 7, we have support. You may know this as resource management in ISO 9001-2008. This is where we talk about competence and provision of resources. The new term documented information is here. We're going to be discussing that later. So taking sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 as a unit, kind of a 4-part series, if you will, these are laying out the framework, the structure by which a company builds a quality management system. And This is very similar in spirit to what we have in sections 4, 5, and 6 of the current ISO 9001-2008 standard. Then in section 8, we have operation. And you can think of operation as kind of the day-to-day activities of the average company, of the average system. Determining the requirements from the customer, designing a product, the control of externally provided processes. That's the new terminology for what you may know as purchasing, and so forth. The majority of audit time is going to be spent in Section 8. That's obviously the intention. Sections 9 and 10 bring the standard to a close with performance evaluation, which covers, again, some very familiar territory, internal audit. You'll note that this is the new placeholder for management review. We have measurement and analysis, so we would expect our inspection and testing activities to be found here. And then finally, Section 10, improvement. We have the familiar activities of continual improvement and corrective action and so forth. Those are all to be found here. Now, to dig a little deeper into some of the key changes and try to give you a sense of what the new content is, let's start with the one that is probably most prevalent in most people's minds and is causing the most heartburn, and that is risk. Risk is used, the term risk is used 16 times in the auditable portion of FDIS 9001. Now, what you have to bear in mind about this idea of risk and risk-based thinking and risk management, this is being viewed in very much the same way that continual improvement was when ISO 9001-2000 was published. This is a system-wide strategy. This is something that permeates all of the aspects of your quality system. But at the same time, it's not the sort of item where you have to have a formal documented risk management process. That is emphasized right in the standard itself. I'm going to be pointing out where when we get to it, but they have assured us that the expectation is not that you have a formal or documented risk management process. But it does expand the idea of risk aversion to one that infects the entirety of the quality system. So what does the requirement say? What are the actual words that are used? Well, it's broken up into two pieces, beginning with 611 where it states, when planning for the quality management system, the organization shall consider the issues that are referred to in 4.1 and requirements referred to in 4.2. and determine the risks and opportunities. And you'll note that those two terms are used together, risks and opportunities. The idea is that when you're planning for your system, there are things that you're trying to avoid, things that are bad, and there's also the opportunities, things that might represent net positives for your quality system. And so what is it we're trying to accomplish? Well, first, we want to be sure that the system we've established can do what it's supposed to do, can achieve its intended results, can enhance desirable effects, can prevent or reduce undesired effects, and overall, can we achieve improvement? So some very broad brushstroke ideas that are presented here in this first part. Now 612 takes things a little bit further and says, okay, once you've determined what your risks and opportunities are, you need to plan the actions to address those risks and address those opportunities. You need to plan how you're going to implement and integrate those actions into the processes you already have, and you need to evaluate the effectiveness of those actions. And then there's some terminology that should be very familiar to those of you that have a good working knowledge of preventive action. Actions taken to address risks and opportunities shall be proportionate to the potential impact on the conformity of products and services. So if you dig into this, you'll realize that this is already very much in line with activities that a lot of companies are already doing. And in fact, we did an analysis on what's already in ISO 9001-2008 that can help companies feel ready for risk management. And there's a number of activities that you can point to, but there's 4 in particular that really offer a direct correlation. And the first of these is management review. You're already assessing your overall quality system. You're already looking for opportunities to improve your system through management review. In 722, review of requirements, we're looking at customer expectations. We're assessing, are we capable? Can we fulfill what it is our customer is looking for us to do? And if there's discrepancies, are we resolving those discrepancies? Probably the most obvious connection is to preventive action, the whole idea of assessing potential problems and taking action to avoid those problems. And then finally, training, making sure that we know what our competency needs are and that we have fulfilled those competency needs now and 6 months and a year from now as well. So my point is, for those of you that have been very concerned about this requirement, I want you to be less concerned, because there's a number of things that you're already doing in ISO 9001-2008 that are risk management in nature. Okay, let's keep going with some of the key changes and take a look at key changes in terminology. The terms procedures, records, and documents have all been eliminated, and they've been replaced with kind of a ubiquitous term, documented information. And the idea here is the standard wants to be more inclusive in accepting alternative approaches to these areas. They want to recognize that not every company has hard copy records. Not every company has hard copy forms even for a number of activities. So we go with this more broad term, documented information. The references to product all read products and services now. Now this was already the case for many, many years. If you look at Clause 3 of ISO 9001-2008, it says wherever the term product appears, it can also mean service. And all they're doing is they're pushing that a little bit further into more common vernacular by putting it into the body of the standard itself. Obviously, for many, many years now, ISO 9001 has not just been intended for companies with tangible product. It is intended for any kind of conceivable system, any kind of conceivable quality system. The term management responsibility has become leadership. The intention here is that management leads by example and involvement rather than simply directing that activities are performed. Continual improvement has evolved. It's now a larger section called improvement, and the idea here is that continual improvement is not the only aspect of improvement. You're also going to see improvement through breakthroughs, reactive changes, reorganizations, and so forth, and these are all contributors to improvement along with continual improvement. Suppliers are now referred to as external providers. Now, again, this is intended to accommodate service organizations, and one of the annexes of the FDIS standard gives us a little bit of an idea of what they mean by external providers. They've kind of expanded what that term means, even beyond what the older term suppliers meant. We're talking about outside suppliers, associate companies, outsourcing. These are all forms of external providers now in the new standard. Probably one of the more dramatic changes that we've seen with the new standard is the elimination of the quality manual, procedures manual, and references to work instructions. Now let's talk a little bit about what this means. There are some companies out there that have a quality manual and have a procedures manual, and it gets used once a year on audit day and at no other time of the year. Now, the idea is that if your manuals are only used on audit day, hopefully what that means is that you've already got a number of robust controls in place for your processes. You already have a way to control those processes. Those are the kinds of companies that are going to have to consider in the new standard, do we want to keep these manuals that we only use on audit day? Now, if the manuals are accurate and they add value to your audit process, then absolutely, that's fine. And we'll be revisiting that idea a little bit later. But the idea of the audit process, and frankly, this has been the idea for some time now, we want to ensure that we are looking for consistent and effective processes. That's been the idea, that's been the intention for many years now. If that can be done without a procedures manual, without a quality manual, absolutely it will be accepted in the audit process. The title Management Representative has been removed from the ISO 9001:2015 standard. Now, the implication is not that the responsibility has been eliminated, but rather the functions that this person fulfills, those should be on management, those should be on leadership. Now, obviously this doesn't mean that you can't appoint a key person, someone that arranges audits and a key contact for corrective action, but the management of the system should not be solely that person's responsibility. They really want to push away from the situation where a management team selects one person and says, okay, you run this system, it's on you now. That's not the intention of the standard. It's intended to be a shared responsibility and a collaborative effort. They've eliminated the terminology permissible exclusions. And they've done something interesting in its place. They've indicated, okay, you can claim non-applicable, and now you can do it for any part of the standard. Now, this means that the validity of those designations is going to be verified at each audit, and that's really no different from what we do now, but they've expanded it to include the entire standard. So now your method for documenting those things will very likely not change, but we need to be certain that those non-applicable designations are accurate and appropriate. They've introduced an interesting new term called interested parties, and I want to take a look at the official definition for interested parties. It reads as follows: a person or organization that can affect, be affected by, or perceive themselves to be affected by a decision or activity. Now, the examples that they give are broad. They talk about customers, owners, people within the organization, suppliers, and even things like bankers and unions and competitors. If you look at clause 4.2, it says determine who your interested parties are. But then on top of it, it says make sure that they're relevant to your system. Now, let's kind of bottom line this. If you're implementing a quality system, you need to know where the inputs to your system are coming from. Who are the parties that play a role in the decisions that you make as an organization? Really, this is good business. This is good business, and it's now been integrated as an aspect of the quality system and therefore subject to audit. But for the vast majority of you, this is not going to change in any kind of dramatic way the manner in which you do business. Let's take a look at some of the key new questions that have been posed by the 2015 standard and how you might be impacted in the audit process from some of these changes. As I mentioned earlier, sections 1 through 3 are not specifically auditable. That's really no different than it was before. In section 4, context, we've already looked at some of these questions. We talk about the purpose of the organization. Who does it exist for? Who are the interested parties? Does any part of the standard qualify for a non-applicable designation? In the leadership section, there's some interesting new ideas. Do we have a leadership structure? Has leadership made itself accountable for the effectiveness or for the lack of effectiveness? Has leadership made sure that the quality policy and the objectives are consistent with the direction of the company? Has the quality management system been integrated into the business processes? Now, there's been some concern that your financial records are going to be subject to audit. That's not the case. The intention here is that the strategic path and the quality path of the companies should be moving in the same direction. In section 6, obviously, we have some key new questions pertaining to risk. Have we considered the risks? Have we considered the opportunities? Have we taken action or planned actions for those risks? And with regards to quality objectives, who's responsible? What's our target date? What are we trying to accomplish by these objectives? In section 7, the support section, a lot of familiar content. One very slightly new area of content here comes in section 7.1.6, where it asks, have you considered the changing needs and trends and looked at your current competency base to determine what you're going to need for the future? In section 8, as I mentioned earlier, kind of the day-to-day activities, our analysis is that really there's no significant new content here that hasn't been present in some form already in ISO 9001-2008. And that also holds true for section 9, monitoring, measurement, analysis, and evaluation. This is the new placeholder for management review, but beyond that, really no significant new content. And that's also true for section 10. Again, section 10, very similar to continual improvement and corrective action from 9001-2008, but once again, no significant new content that we have not seen already. So, as you can see here, the changes to the standard are really minimal and manageable. Risk itself, as I've mentioned now a couple of times, is not so new and not so scary if you consider the number of things within ISO 9001 that you're already doing that are pertinent to a risk management type activity. Let's take a look now at the finalized structure of the standard. And as I mentioned, the final ISO 9001 standard is going to, in our analysis, it's going to bear almost no distinguishable difference to the FDIS standard. So we can feel confident that we're going to be looking at, in the next few slides here, what we're going to look at is going to very, very closely resemble the layout of the final standard. In section 0.1, the very first portion of the standard, there is a general overview, talks about who the standard is going to benefit, talks about risk-based thinking, plan, do, check, act, and it provides 4 key terms, 3 of which are getting official definitions for the first time in an ISO 9001 document. We have the familiar term shall, which indicates a mandatory requirement, and obviously there are numerous instances of shall statements. And then the 3 new ones, should, which represents rather a recommendation. Now, there are no should statements within the current 9001 standard. I think their intention is perhaps in the future there might be. There are a definition for the term may, which indicates a permission is required. There is one use of the term may, and then can, indicating a possibility or a capability, and there are numerous instances of the term can within the standard. In section 0.2, we find the 7 quality management principles and a reference to the ISO 9000 standard is given. 0.3 emphasizes the process approach. There's a new graphic for Plan, Do, Check, Act, really this is hitting home, as Nigel Croft indicated, the importance of Plan, Do, Check, Act both at the system and process level. In section 0.3.3, we have our first official definition of what's meant by risk-based thinking and kind of an emphasizing of the importance of risk-based thinking. Section 0.4 establishes the official relationship to ISO 9000 and ISO 9004. Those are the fundamentals and vocabulary, as well as the guidelines for continual improvement standards. As I've mentioned now a couple of times, sections 1, 2, and 3 are non-auditable, but there are a couple of items of note here. There's some general verbiage in section 1 that pertains to what ISO 9001 applies to. In section 0.2, we have the normative reference. Interestingly, it does give a date of 2015 for the publication of ISO 9000. Now, we've concluded this means that in all likelihood, the 9000 document, the fundamentals and vocabulary document for its part, will be published at the same time as the ISO 9001 standard. So we should see that next month or very soon afterwards. Section 3, as I said, is terms and definitions. At present, there is no content within that section. It's our interpretation that this could be a future placeholder for ISO 9001 specific definitions. But for now, the definitions provided in the ISO 9000 document itself are all that are referred to. We've already reviewed sections 4 through 10 and gone over some of the content therein. Let's turn our attention then to the back end of the standard. And in particular, I'd like to draw your attention to what I think is an extremely helpful addition to the standard, Annex A. Annex A is called informative, and it's broken down into 8 pieces, each of which is going to provide help not just for you, the organizations, but I think it's also going to help the auditors in terms of understanding the intent behind certain documents and certain requirements. First and foremost, we have structure and terminology. This reinforces the doctrine that an organization doesn't have to align their documentation to match ISO 9001 2015. Doesn't even have to use the specific terms found in the standard. The intention here is it's your system, it's your processes. You need to set these things up in such a way that they benefit you and make sense to you. And the auditors are supposed to be able to figure it out and align it to the standard through the process of auditing. So definitely make your documentation as personal as you wish. Section 8.2 talks about products and services, provides a more full explanation of what they were going for in terms of reading products and services in the standard rather than just product. Section A3 talks about the needs and expectations of interested parties, gives a much more full explanation of the intent behind that term. A4 is risk-based thinking, and that is an extensive section. It's got a lot of content in terms of trying to understand what's meant by risk-based thinking, and it re-emphasizes the fact that a formal structure, a formal process for risk management is not required and not to be demanded during the audit process. A5 is called applicability, and it talks about the new logic on removing the term exclusions and this whole new idea of non-applicables and the fact that we can now take exception to any part of the standard if it's justified. Clause A6 talks about documented information. What is this new term? How did it replace procedures, records, documents, and so forth? Organizational knowledge is explained in A7, talking about competency and ongoing competency. What are the challenges that an organization faces that pertain to competency and so forth. And then section AA talks about externally provided products and services. What does that phrase mean? Who is it going to apply to? And so forth. Annex B is some more extensive discussion on the relationship between ISO 9001 and a number of other publications, including 9004 and 10001 and so forth. And then the standard concludes with a bibliography. Let's talk a little bit about the need to overhaul your system, and is this going to be required? Is this going to be necessary? Our analysis has concluded absolutely not. We mentioned several slides ago, one of the intentions of TC 176 is we want to improve the inclusiveness of the standard. Now, if you go and tell 1 million worldwide registered firms that they have to overhaul their system, that's not inclusive. That's inconsistent with the goal of improving the inclusiveness of the standard. So what does this mean? I mentioned earlier about documentation and the kinds of companies that use their manuals and the ones that don't. If you have a quality manual and a set of procedures that fit your business and define what you do and you work with them, absolutely keep those things. If they are adding value to your system, absolutely keep them. That's also true for work instructions, for your current quality policy, for your current objectives. If all of these things are doing what they're supposed to do, then absolutely keep them. Let's take a look now at some frequently asked questions. These are things that have been asked a few times over in past presentations, and we've worked up some structured responses to these particular questions. Is our staff going to have to complete transition training? Now, this is going to depend a great deal on how extensive the revisions to your system are going to be. But in general, you're going to have to, at the very least, provide some awareness training. You're going to have to put the word out to say, hey, look, we've got a new standard, we've done some transition work on it, and make sure that folks are aware of how the revisions are going to affect them. Now, bear in mind, it's entirely conceivable that the majority of your staff is going to feel no effect whatsoever from your company's transition. If you have a person that is running a lathe every day and making parts, and they work from a part print and a traveler, well, that part of the process is not going to change in transitioning to ISO 9001 2015. That's going to be quite a bit different from perhaps other folks within the organization. Now, what about the internal auditors? Do they have to complete transition training? Now, what you have to remember about internal auditing is it's viewed in the same light as any other required competency within a system. You as an organization are responsible for determining what it means to be competent and to make sure that your auditors are competent. It's up to you to determine competency requirements and methods therein. So decide for yourself what it means to be competent to audit in an internal audit, ISO 9001 2015. We're not permitted to tell you how to do it. We can only say that do something consistent, do something effective. If you already have a seasoned team of internal auditors, it's entirely conceivable that they could do a period of self-study and then successfully transition. Now, obviously, the competency of your auditors is going to continue to be judged by the effectiveness of your internal audit process. That's where we come in and look to see, okay, what have you done to maintain the effectiveness of this internal audit process? Will the other standards be updated? There's a number of you out there, perhaps, that are TS 16949 certified or AS 9100 certified. We have been told that all of the major sector-specific standards are planning to transition and continue their alignment with ISO 9001. We know that the targeted timelines are all roughly 2016. Beyond that, we don't know a whole lot. The only other item that we know for sure is that ISO 13485, which is used for medical devices, that standard has no intention of continuing its alignment with ISO 9001. ISO 1345 is in the midst of its own update. They are targeting early 2016 for publication. Should we get certified now or should we wait? I'm sure there's a number of you on the call today that are in the midst of implementing a new quality management system. And you're wondering, okay, I've done all this work on implementing ISO 9001-2008. Is there still value for me in pursuing certification? Well, we can't make that decision for you. But you need to first of all bear in mind that ISO 9001-2008 still has at least 3 years of usability left in it. And remember that the very first audits to ISO 9001-2015 are going to be difficult. They're going to be tough for us as your auditors. They're going to be tough for you as the auditees. Now, as the days and months and weeks go by, it's going to be a more comfortable process for us to audit ISO 9001-2015. So I would say that if you have to be certified before year's end, your best option is probably still going to be ISO 9001-2008. Beyond that, it's going to have to be kind of a calculated decision on the value of going for 2008 or putting the time and effort into upgrading and then going for it. In terms of the steps that you can take now to be ready for the transition process, we do defer to the IAF informative document number 9, which recommends a 7-step approach. First, a full review of the standard itself to identify any gaps that you have, a plan of implementation that includes assigned responsibility, making sure that all of your documents have been updated to reflect any new or revised processes, having awareness and transition training be performed, followed by an internal audit, which would also result in a management review being performed, and then corrective action for all internal audit findings, and finally, coordinating with your certification body. Let's talk one last time about the whole issue of document transition. We've been asked, well, do I have to renumber my procedures? Do I have to redo the references within my procedures? First and foremost, you need to make sure that your documentation works for you, that it is reflective of your processes and your activities. Now, if the procedures within the content of the procedures, if it references, for example, Section 8.2.2 of ISO 9001-2008, then yes, those items will need to be updated. But in terms of what's the procedure's number, things of this nature, those types of items do not necessarily have to be changed. You need to make sure that these procedures work for you first and foremost. Obviously, we hope that you will work with your auditors to ensure a smooth transition process. Your auditors are going to be a valuable resource for you in ensuring that your transition is smooth and successful. We here at PGR, we're very excited about ISO 9001-2015. We feel this is a beneficial update to the standard. We definitely will continue to provide timely updates on this process and make sure that your transition is as smooth as possible. We have prepared a couple of reports that we think would be beneficial to you. We've prepared a side-by-side comparison between ISO 9001 and FDIS 9001. We've also prepared a frequently asked questions report. It includes the FAQs that we looked at today, plus some others. Those can both be found on our website at www.pjr.com. And I would also encourage you to opt in for future updates. There is a subscribe link on our webpage, right on the home page. If you enter your email address and click subscribe, we will keep you automatically informed of the latest news and updates pertaining to ISO 9001-2015. Okay, I'm going to turn my attention now to the questions dashboard and have a look at what we've got today in terms of questions. Looks like we have a number of inquiries already. Okay, we have a question from Ann Brown in terms of locating a copy of the FDIS 9001 standard. And it's our understanding that it is available for purchase on the ISO website. You may also want to check the ANSI website. That's ansi.org. We have a question from Jay Lawrence. Jay is asking, when in September will the new 9001-2015 standard be available for purchase? Jay, we really don't have a firm date just yet. We will definitely pass that along when we get it. Mary Redding asks, is the small amount of time required to audit the new standard a one-time need? Mary, I believe you're asking, is the additional time going to be one time only? Absolutely. In terms of the transition audit, there's a number of factors that go into that, but yes, it is a one-time event in terms of the additional transition audit time. Okay, Clive Devers asks, do you have any knowledge or inclination if the ANSI or ASQ will purchase the royalty to the ISO 9001-2015 standard as an ANSI ASQ Q9001-2015 as was done in 2008? Clive, I'm afraid I have no particular insight or information on that particular item at this time, but we can definitely research that. Okay. Samantha Berg asks, if we are currently scheduled for a surveillance audit in October of this year, will this audit be based on ISO 9001-2008? Samantha, I would say the answer to that is absolutely yes. We will make that audit to ISO 9001-2008. At that very early phase, we would only do an ISO 9001-2015 audit if we were specifically requested to do so. Okay, we have a question here from William Fingston. Does Perry Johnson have any plans to host seminars or multi-day workshops to assist companies in creating transitional foundations or plans, action items from 2008 to 2015? William, I think you're speaking specifically of like a gap assessment, a transition assessment. I don't believe we have any plans for that per se. That does kind of get into a consulting function, but we definitely plan to offer additional webinars and perhaps workshops on having a better understanding of the nuances of these new and revised requirements. Okay, Mary Redding asks, does Annex SL still follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act model? Absolutely. There is absolutely going to continue to be Plan, Do, Check, Act. There is, as I mentioned earlier, an improved graphic for Plan, Do, Check, Act right in the standard itself. Jay Lawrence asks, will the new standard include a cross-reference between the ISO 2008 and ISO 2015 standards? Absolutely. The cross-reference is going to be included. PJR, for its part, will also be providing a cross-reference matrix. And we have one available already that's based on the FDIS standard. Okay. we've had some questions about the availability of today's presentation. It will be available for download shortly after the presentation is concluded. You'll be able to view it under our past webinars link. Okay. Samantha Berg indicates, will there be exemptions for Section 8, such as the sections that discuss product design? Absolutely. Our interpretation of the new requirements, Samantha, is that any part of the standard can be claimed for exemption if it is permissible, if it is a truly permissible exemption. Okay, Samantha also asks, if physical records of our procedures are no longer needed, how can an auditor ensure that everyone in the company is following the same set of rules for those procedures consistently and that they are effective, especially if he doesn't know what they are to begin with? That's a great question, Samantha. And there's a couple of ways to view this and to approach it. I want to reemphasize one of the things I mentioned during the webinar, and that is that we look for consistency and effectiveness of processes. We look to see that processes are consistent and overall effective. And we do that in a number of ways. You have to remember that in an audit situation, there's a number of types of objective evidence that an auditor can look at. There's things that are said in interviews. There are things that are read in available documentation. There are things that are observed. And we would look to see that we have multiple points of reference for understanding the system and that we take multiple samples. So in other words, if I interview one person and I'm told a certain set of information, I'm going to interview somebody else and verify that the things I'm hearing are consistent. In terms of our physical records no longer needed, that's true. But there's a number of places in the standard where it says you will maintain documented information. And that's taken as saying, okay, you need to be able to provide evidence that this activity is occurring and that it is effective. Okay, Samantha also asks, are the words can and may optional or required? Now, bear in mind that those are terms that are used within the body of the standard itself. It's our interpretation that they are not optional items. It's just intended to kind of clarify the intent of the clause. Okay. Samantha also asks, is the FDIS the final document? No, it is not. We will not have a final document until September at the earliest. Okay. I do hope I'm pronouncing this right. Rehat Latif asks, are government departments and watchdog agencies and operative neighboring facilities encompassed under the label of interested parties? That's an interesting question, and I would say that in terms of who are the interested parties, primarily it's going to be dependent on what the organization has concluded in terms of who the interested parties are. I would not feel comfortable at this moment saying, yes, government departments in and of themselves fall under interested parties. It would depend very much on a number of factors that are going to play in a case-by-case basis. But I do want to emphasize that the way the standard has laid this out, it is on the organization to determine who the interested parties are. Okay. Okay, Clive Devers asks, is there a plan to add additional time for internal or external audits as part of a transition? If yes, why is there additional time and not less time? First of all, absolutely, there is going to be, in certain cases, a small amount of additional audit time. But in terms of what that amount of time is going to be, it's going to vary on a case-by-case basis. And it's rooted in the fact that this is a new standard and a new set of requirements. Okay, Rehat Latif also asks, can you please give a few examples of documented information other than a manual, document of procedures, SOPs, those that can demonstrate the consistency and effectiveness of the processes? I'll give you one example that absolutely comes to mind, and that would be records of inspection of product. If you have a product, you have to be able to demonstrate evidence that it meets all applicable requirements, those from the customer and those that are internally placed. That's one of the items where the standard requires documented information. So I would propose that records of inspection would constitute documented information. Excuse me. Adam Vandekar asks, my recert is scheduled for April of 2016. Should we use the 3-year transition and recert early in late 2017 to ISO 9001 2015, or go for 2015 during the next audit? You mentioned that the earlier audits may be tougher. Andy, I think with an April 2016 recertification, I do believe by April a number of the bumps in the road will have smoothed out by then. I don't think that I would be uncomfortable telling you that you can plan on being ready then. But as an organization, if you feel that it's better to wait until 2017 during your first annual surveillance under your new cert, we can definitely accommodate you. But I don't believe that April 2016 would represent a real tough challenge. Okay, Lindsay McBain asks, should we wait to perform internal auditor training until the new standard is published? Lindsay, I do believe that if you're speaking of official sanctioned internal audit training through a third party, it would probably be appropriate to wait. If you want to take a look at the FDIS now and do some transition training now internally, I don't think that would represent a problem either. Okay. Okay, Dan Terry asks, what about existing integrated systems that included AS9100C and or TS16949? Our interpretation, Dan, is that as those new standards come online, companies will be able to roll those systems into a single integrated quality system. The intention, if I may, is to eliminate the scenario where a company has multiple procedures manuals, multiple quality manuals, that they have an integrated system. If you've already done that, if you've already accomplished that, I don't foresee an issue with you being able to continue to use that integrated system. Okay. Lindsay McBain asks, do you know if we're still going to be required to have a quality manual for AS9100? Lindsay, I'm afraid I do not know that at this time. We've not been told what the potential documentation requirements will be for AS9100. Okay. Okay. Mary Redding asks, will the new annex, once implemented, reduce the total audit time for an integrated system? Too early to tell, Mary. My gut is telling me no, it would not reduce the overall amount of audit time, but we will have to determine that when those standards are all online and we have to plan a joint audit. Okay, Steve Carasone asks, so beginning in January, we'll be auditing to the new standard. We will begin auditing to the new standard as soon as it is published, Steve, and that is to say that PJR's intention is to have resources ready to go for those companies that for whatever reason are aggressively pursuing ISO 9001-2015 certification. The 2008 standard is going to continue to be available for audit well into 2018, though. So we will have both standards as available products. Okay. Rayhat Latif asks, would the litigation and or public complaints be a matter of concern for auditors assessing ISO 9001-2015? Again, interesting question. I don't know necessarily that would factor in, but it's a possibility. I'll go as far as saying it's a possibility. Okay. Okay, Steve Carasone clarifies we have a recertification audit in January. Steve, at this particular moment, I feel confident saying that we could accommodate a recertification to ISO 9001-2015, and if that is what you so desire. Okay, and final question here. Dan Terry asks, will PJR offer internal audit checklists? It is not an item that we're planning to offer at this time, no. Okay, I want to thank everyone for your time today, and I hope you have a good day. Thank you.